Hello, everyone. This is Tanya Wilcox from TheDream.Us. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, Why Students Do Not Seek Help and How We Can Help Them. Joining me today, we have Sadhana Singh, Program Manager for TheDream.Us, who will be helping us manage the webinar. And we also have our guest, Ross O'Hara, PhD, who's a behavioral researcher at Persistence Plus, where he applies his expertise in behavioral science to develop interventions that improve college student retention. He also talks about how nudging can reshape the college student experience. And prior to Persistence Plus, Dr. O'Hara earned his PhD in social psychology from Dartmouth College and completed his postdoctoral fellowships at the University of Missouri and the University of Connecticut. This webinar, Why Students Do Not Seek Help and How to Help Them, we're doing this one because we know that you as partner colleges and us are giving a lot of resources to our students via email or text or via meetings. And yet we know that sometimes students do not respond to the help that we're trying to give them. They might not be coming to our meetings, or they might not be responding to emails. And we wonder, why is that happening? Why our students are not making themselves available or or using the resources we're giving them? And what is the psychology behind that, and what can we do differently? And about a few months ago, we had Dr. Ross present to the staff at TheDream.Us his research and his suggestions, and we found them very interesting. And in the past couple of months, we've been implementing some of his recommendations. And just to give you a couple of different examples on that, is, as you know, we have this Career Connections initiative where we're trying to bring job and internship opportunities to our scholars. And we were just announcing those as like, here's this opportunity for you. And not many of our scholars were responding to that or attending the info sessions. So Dr. Ross, for example, one of the things that he told us was that the low-income first-generation college student is very interested in helping others and in service. So the messaging around Career Connections became about how do these companies practice corporate responsibility. So for example, when we announced Bank of America internships, we talked a lot about what Bank of America is doing to help the environment. Or when we talked about teaching TFA, we talked about how teaching can be a social justice practice. We changed how we communicate with our scholars via text and emails to make them more targeted to the audience that the content was pertained to. So instead of sending everybody an email where only some of the scholars might be interested, we just really found who the scholars would be interested in this message, and then sent that message only to them, so that we're not blanketing our scholars with information that some of them might not be interested in. Anyway, so we found the information very helpful, and we thought that you would too, and that's why we're bringing you this webinar today. And before we start, just a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar. We will be sending it to you. And then there will be a couple of times when there will be a Q&A time. So there's a Q&A box that you can find in the Zoom. Just start typing in your questions. And when we come to the time of Q&A, then we will be able to answer your questions. And with that, I'm turning it over to Ross.
Thank you so much, and so wonderful to hear of the work you've been doing since we spoke a few months ago to incorporate some more of this social psychology, behavioral economics, nudging, whatever you want to call it, ideas into your communications with students. And yes, that's what I'm very excited to share with all of you out there and on this webinar today, some ideas about why students don't seek help and some of the behavioral strategies you might be able to employ to get them to be more open to accepting the different types of help they need to succeed in college. So this was mentioned in the introduction. I just want to point out that I'm educated in social psychology, and what you're going to be hearing today is very much framed around lessons out of social psychology about why people behave the way they do. And in general, sort of when I talk to groups like your own or in the work we do at Persistence Plus, we are very particularly interested in trying to get underneath the surface of college students' behavior and really asking why do they behave in the ways they do, and what exactly can we target in their psychology to change their behaviors to engage in more successful responses to challenges and threats, such as going to ask for someone's help with something. So that's what we'll be talking about today. So to start, we just wanted to kind of get you all involved and hear some of your thoughts about the challenges you're facing with students. And thank you to all you who, when you signed up, submitted some questions. And I think you'll see many of those get answered over the course of this webinar. But, I just wanted to present a few scenarios to think about, start thinking about the different types of challenges students face in some broad buckets and some of the reasons why they don't engage in help seeking. So the first one that we encounter a lot with the students we work with at Persistence Plus, and I'm sure you run into with all your students, is students who struggle with finances. We know increasingly that students not only struggle to pay for college itself, but can be all the living expenses and the books, and that's why we see increasing rates of hunger, food insecurity, and housing insecurity. Yet we know that there are many students who go through these struggles and will ultimately not, seek out help or seek out all the help they could for these types of things. So we're going to do a couple of polls. And in this first one, we want to think about a student who is doing very well in school but struggling with finances and doesn't really ask for help, and hear from you and your experience, the students you work with who don't ask for help with their financial struggles. Like, what's the main reason you see for that happening? And so if we can put up the first poll and see how this works. There we go. So if all of you could sort of choose, the reasons you see for why the students you have who struggle with their finances, don't seek help. What do you think are the main reasons? And we're just gonna take time to see that, get some more responses in.
So Donna, I think you might be able to close the poll now.
Okay, and so here, we see people kind of answering. See, there's 21 of you out there, great, and kind of answering across the board many different things. 71% saying just being unaware of what's going on, that tied with kind of shame around revealing their level of poverty or how they're struggling, or just general discomfort asking for money. Good. I see, that sort of gets to this point that there's lots of reasons why students don't ask for help. So let's do a second one. One of the other big areas college students struggle is struggling in class. And this is something I've seen both as in my current position, and I used to teach college classes, that a student who's not doing well and they never come to office hours or go to the tutoring center or anything like that. So this type of student, why do you see in your work the reasons that that student doesn't seek help when they don't get what's going on in class? So here, thank you all for voting in. Here we see number one being this, like, afraid to ask for help. And that we know it can be especially prevalent among students who are considered non-traditional in college, who don't come from backgrounds that have been well represented in higher education, because asking for help could be a signal toward not really belonging in college. And we'll talk more about that. And then here, being unaware comes up again as another key issue, and sort of wanting to figure things out on their own. And we'll talk a little bit about self-reliance and how that can actually get in the way. Great. So we'll just do one more. Kind of one of the other things I talked about with the dream before is just the issues around students and struggling with mental health issues. So kind of the same question: a student who's struggling with mental health, they don't actually ever seek help for it and causes them to drop out of college. What reasons do you see for why those students don't seek mental health help? All right, and it looks like the results are coming in. Okay, so here, our number one answer is raised not to discuss feelings. That's something we've definitely talked a lot about with our partners who especially serve a lot of the Hispanic or Latinx communities, this idea of not discussing feelings. And so that can definitely be a barrier to this. And doesn't want to be a burden. That was something that came from our conversations in setting up this webinar, this idea of just, already being someone who has accepted some degree of help to get into college and is working, with an organization like The Dream, but, doesn't want to kind of throw something else in the mix that they need help with. And then the awareness factor coming in third place here. So yeah, I think it's very, thank you for participating in those. I think it's very interesting to see how, across these three different types of help, broadly speaking, that college students need to succeed, that we came up with some, very different rankings of what kinds of challenges they face. And so across the rest of this webinar, I think we'll get to address a lot of these issues as to why help seeking doesn't occur and talk about some potential remedies. Okay. So what I'm going to share with you today is a psychosocial model of help seeking. And this derives from the work of a researcher named Karabenek. The specific paper, Karabenek and Dembo, lays out a multi-step process that needs to occur in order for someone to successfully ask for help. If you actually go and get this paper, you'll see there are a lot more steps in the Karabenek and Dembo model. I've tried to shorten it to condense some of the steps to sort of make it, something we can get through in 30 or 40 minutes. And so this is really looking at, everything that has to go on in a person's mind, really, to leading them to be able to ask for help. It starts with just acknowledging whether or not they have a problem. And we're not going to dive too deeply into this step today. We're going to sort of skip ahead to someone who knows they have a problem, but they are not asking for help for one of many reasons. But, it's just not enough to know you have a problem. First thing you have to decide is whether or not is help available for this problem. That goes not only to awareness, but some other issues we'll talk about. If you know help is available, you have to decide, would that help even be efficacious for you? And if you decide that, yes, there's something out there that would help me, do you actually want that kind of help? And there's many reasons why people don't want to be helped. And then after all that, you still have to go and ask for help. And that in and of itself is a whole decision-making process that can be complicated by many factors in our students' lives, especially just how busy they are and how things like going to a tutoring center or making a counseling appointment can slip through the cracks when you're going to school and working and doing everything else they do. So we're going to walk through these last 4 steps in the psychosocial model of help seeking and talk about what they mean and what the implications are for helping students. We're going to start with, is help available? So this is, what came up in our polls with awareness. Are students actually aware of the type of help available on campus? And these are just, many of the ads that I was able to pull from the internet that we know colleges advertise their help resources quite a bit in most cases. There are flyers on campus, emails sent to students, these things are talked about in orientation, and yet students remain to some degree unaware of what's available to them out there. I've done focus groups with graduating students at different colleges who got through college and didn't know like there was tutoring center available, but they managed through anyhow. But one of the things we know from years and years of of interventions to try to get people to connect with resources is simply information is not enough. You need to dive deeper than that, than simply sending out information about what's available on a campus. And so when we're thinking about sort of how do we raise awareness of help resources, it's not simply enough just to we just need to market more, send more emails, or send more text messages. We really need to think about what different students perceive as help. Because if they don't perceive going to a tutoring center or going to a counseling center as a source of help, then those messages are not really going to break through to them. So what I mean is there's this research done by Kara Bennick, the researcher I brought up earlier, showing that there, in a study of the classroom, so this was really focused on academic help seeking, but it can extend to other types of help seeking, that there are 4 main types of help seekers. And the way he defined these help seekers was along a continuum of how much threat they experience from seeking help. Like, is asking for help something that is inherently scary or anxiety inducing to them? And he defined these 4 types of help seekers. So on the left side, the student who is not threatened by help seeking at all, he used the term a strategic formal help seeker. This is the kind of student we try to make every student be. The student who will go ask their professor in their office hours for help. The student who will go to the tutoring center, who will go to the mental health center. This group of students are basically the ones, in most cases, we don't really have to worry too much about because they seek help and they seek it from the sources we tend to attribute as the sources of help. Next in our continuum, a little bit higher level of help-seeking threat, but still people who generally will go seek help with the issues they face, are the strategic informal students. And what that means is they're willing to seek help, but they don't necessarily like getting it from the sources we usually push to them. They will form a study group with their peers to get help in class, or they will talk to their friends when they're struggling with mental health, or they will go to their family for advice. And I know sometimes at colleges, we get worried about these sources of help because sometimes your parents don't really know the answers, or sometimes your friends might not have the most accurate information about what's going on campus. But this is the places these students will go. And so we have to think about when we have ways to sort of improve the strategic informal sources of help available, because this is what students look to as a help resource. Next on our list, the students who are really starting to get more threatened by help seeking, Kara Bennick called non-strategic help seekers. These are the students we traditionally think of as the ones who don't go seek help for anything. Like, you reach out to them, you send them emails or texts, and they don't show up. And often a lot of this boils down to a belief that whatever help they're going to seek isn't really going to be beneficial for them, that they're just going to fail this class, or they'll never be able to, overcome these financial gaps or whatever it is. And so this is really the kind of student we tend to target when we're thinking about, like, how do we get students to come ask for help? And then the final group are these avoidant help seekers. They're sort of an interesting one in that they're defined by being very threatened by help seeking. They think asking for help is really an anxiety provoking kind of situation. So when they do ask for help, they tend to ask for help in a very transactional manner. So they don't want to necessarily, be taught what they need to know in class. They're the type of student who's just like, can you just tell me how to do this? Can you just fill out this form for me? And they're doing this not because like they're lazy or not because they don't care. It's because the act of actually getting genuine, sincere help is very scary to them, but they know they need this. So they've come up with this other strategy of just trying to get through the situation as quickly and as transactionally as possible. And so this is, another group of students that we can really struggle with to get them to seek help in a genuine, earnest manner. So when we're thinking about like, how do we get students to go seek help? We really need to think about that, how we can have different avenues for students to seek help and not always make it about, you have to go, to this one place or this one person and engage with them in this one certain way in order to get help with whatever issues you're facing in college. So one important point I want to make is that a student's help-seeking strategy can vary by the type of help they need. The Karabenic research I just shared with you was very focused on academic help seeking. And perhaps, there's a student who's very willing to go talk to a professor, go talk to a tutor about their academic struggles, but then is reticent to go to a counseling center, would much rather talk to their friends about emotional struggles. In that case, their strategic, their strategy varies from situation to situation. And that is all to say, these types of, knowing how a student wants to respond to different types of challenges is difficult. It's something, you tease out from a relationship with a student and really just try to keep an open mind as to what could constitute help for different students. And so with that, you're trying to figure out like, a student who needs help, should you be pushing more formal sources? Should you try pushing some informal sources? What's the right balance of that? So that way you're really connecting with different types of students who want different types of help. One thing I decided not to dive into for sake of time, but I at least want to bring up and get you all to think about is, can students who are reticent to seek help find ways to help themselves? There's an interesting body of research that's come out in the last couple of years about advice-giving interventions. This idea that if someone needs help, say, with their study skills, giving them prompting a situation in which they give advice to other people about study skills can be very motivating. You're sort of inducing them to feel like an expert in how to study, and that can actually motivate their own behaviors to become that expert. So you sort of put the horse before the cart in a good way. And so it's a really interesting field. I decided not to dive deeply into it here, but in these slides, if we send out like the PDF of the slides, there is a link to a piece I wrote about these types of interventions, and you have one of the leading researchers in this field, Dr. Eskris Winkler. You can just look her up and find some more of this research. And finally, we have those that last group of help seekers that they don't truly want to be helped in the way we think about help. They're getting through it by just asking for the answer. And so a lot of this, those students who are very threatened by help seeking, we can address that through growth mindsets. And that's going to be sort of segue into the next section of the psychosocial model of help seeking. So, once you get to the point of a student who has some sort of challenge, knowing that help is available, whether that help, they perceive that help to come from formal or informal sources, they have to decide that that person or office or resource can actually help improve their situation. And so here, one of the core issues in that question is whether a student has a fixed or a growth mindset. So I'm sure many of you have heard a lot about fixed and growth mindsets. from, the whole world of education. And they're really important because if you have some sort of fixed mindset, it automatically suggests that, your situation cannot improve. Things are fixed in the way they are. And so why would you ever go seek help? And so, of course, these have been applied very much in the world of learning, from all the way from little children to college students. I think it's really important, though, to really take a look at exactly what sort of behavioral and psychological components make up a fixed versus growth mindset, because there's a lot going on there beyond just believing you can change, believing you can get better at academic activities versus thinking, well, you're just born good at some things or not, or born bad at other things. And so under a fixed mindset, some of the sort of behavioral and personality characteristics you would look for is that people with a fixed mindset have a specific learning goal, which is all about perception. You want to look smart, or on the contrariness, don't look dumb. And so that really goes to those speaks to those avoidant help seekers. They're really concerned with not looking dumb. And so they think if they can just get the answer to their problem as quickly as they can, that's going to succeed in their main goal, which is don't look dumb. And so typically with a fixed mindset, the view of effort is that effort is weakness. And I think this is something we see, underrepresented students even more susceptible to, because they're not only dealing with the idea that effort can be perceived as weakness. If you need to try at something, it means you're not good at it, which, is of course not the way to think about any type of skill or activity you're trying to do. But they have to balance that with, issues surrounding like stereotype threat or identity threat that worry about people perceiving someone from their racial group or ethnic group or whatever their background is as being inferior to other people on campus. And so effort, if that's a sign of weakness, can also be a sign that, yes, the stereotype about you and people like you is true. And so people with a fixed mindset, when they see challenges, they tend to give up. Because if putting forth effort makes you look weak, just move on to something else. And so they tend to de-identify with areas in which they're challenged. They decide, well, that's stupid, I don't care about that, and focus on places where they're going to have more success. And so if the challenges come up in the classroom, their grades decline. Students with a growth mindset, of course, their learning goals are more about learning. And so, facing challenges in school is not met with avoidance or threat. It's met with sort of this challenge mindset that I'm going to work harder at this. I'm going to try strategies. And often a growth mindset is inherently affiliated with asking for help for things. And so these students view effort as just the means to improvement. So when they face a challenge, they work harder and their grades tend to improve. It's really important, I think, briefly to point out, though, that growth mindsets, this whole concept, is not just an academic one. It's not just about how students think about learning and intelligence. It's more generally this belief that efforts to change can be successful, and what you're trying to change can go far beyond just what you do in a classroom. So yes, intelligence and skills are very important things to have growth mindsets for, but you can have growth mindsets about things like personality, like can people change who they are with enough effort? Beliefs, oftentimes in today's very politically charged climate, I think a lot of people have a fixed mindset about beliefs, is that, people on one side of an issue are never going to change how they feel about that issue. And people on the other side, they're never going to change how they feel. But you can have a growth mindset about those types of beliefs and whether or not they can change over time. And beliefs that cultures can change, or just kind of the world at large, feeling like having a fixed mindset that, nothing is ever going to change can be very discouraging in many situations. But believing that cultures can evolve and have different sort of views over time can help with a lot of difficult situations. And so there's been research done on some of these other types of growth mindsets showing that, having growth mindsets in general about all of these different areas in this one study, they started out by showing that it leads to giving people the benefit of the doubt. So they were looking at whether children, aggressed toward another child who wronged them in a game. And the children who were prompted with more of a growth mindset were more likely to turn the other cheek and interpret the other child's slight as, not something that they're just a mean kid and they're always going to be a mean kid, but interpreting it in other ways to give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they're just having a bad day or something. And so people with growth mindsets tend to have lower stress levels and overall better health. So this is a much broader concept than just focused on academics. But to sort of narrow back into academics, since that is the area that's been researched most in growth mindsets, just wanted to show you an example of one of the studies that's been done where they asked college students to write about growth mindsets. And they did it with this prompt in which they were told, you're going to write letters to younger struggling students to help them view intelligence as something that can grow with effort. And that way, these younger students are going to be more likely to remain in school and put effort into learning. So in this study, some of these college students who are recruited in the study wrote these letters to middle schoolers to tell them all about how, the brain is malleable. When you learn new things, you create new synaptic connections. And, if you try really hard at something, you're going to get better at doing it. There were two control conditions, one in which college students just didn't write any sort of letter, and one in which they wrote a letter to middle schoolers that had nothing to do with growth mindsets, just to understand whether or not the act of writing the letter had any impact on their future performance. And then these researchers tracked these college students to look at their grades to see if there was any change in their academic behavior based on having written this letter to these middle schoolers telling them about growth mindsets. And that's exactly what they found was, they looked at this separated by both white and black students and found a significant increase for both groups, that students who wrote about growth mindsets to these middle schoolers had better grades at the end of the semester than those students who wrote either of the control condition letters. And so right there, one simple exercise, one simple essay had a fairly profound impact on how these students perceived intelligence and how that impacted their own academic performance. And so this is a place where I wanted to, kind of give some example about like how you can put some of this in your own communications by showing like what we do at Persistence Plus. So going to give the very brief explanation so I can show you some examples of like at Persistence Plus, when we work with colleges or organizations, we provide support to their students through text messaging. And we send text messages on one example of things about building a growth mindset. And so students can get messages from us based on studies like the one I just showed you, prompting them to do things like write about the importance of a growth mindset. And so this is an example of one of those types of interactions we've had with one of the students we've served, where we can ask students to talk to us about whether they believe people are born smart, a fixed mindset, or if you have to work hard to become smart, which would be more growth mindset. And so students who indicate to us that that they feel like you're just born smart or good at some things, we try to get them to think and write about ways in which they have improved at something over time, and trying to get them to generalize that. And this is something we can do over and over again to try to help build a growth mindset over time. And we're, instead of having people sitting down in the classroom writing essays, we're able to do this all over text messaging. So there's lots of ways you can try to help students to establish a growth mindset, which is, getting back to the whole point of help seeking, is going to sort of be the foundation for them being willing to seek help, because first you have to believe that help can actually be efficacious for you. So I, want to build in a break here. I don't know if we have any questions coming in over the Q&A or chat boxes, but I just wanted to be able to take a breath, and I know it's a lot of information, to see if people had questions at this point.
And beyond questions, also if people want to share a story or a case of a student that you've been trying to work with and where you've hit a barrier, feel free also to share cases, because Ross is happy to talk through cases too, beyond the questions. So
yes,
just go ahead and use the Q&A box if you have questions. But right now, I don't see any coming in, so maybe we can just continue.
Okay, yeah, and you know, everyone listening out there, there'll definitely be time at the end. So the next step in this model, after a student decides like help is available and going to get that help could benefit me, is they have to decide whether or not they actually want help. And there's so many reasons why students decide like they don't actually want to seek help, many of which are very psychological or emotional. And many of those came up in our polls about, you know, feeling shame around discussing poverty. I'm going to give you an example of that. Or, you know, not wanting to talk about, you know, personal feelings. And so one of the big areas we look at is imposter syndrome, this idea that, you know, you think everyone else is doing really well in school and you don't really belong here, and any sort of slight indication of that, like going and asking for help from a tutoring center, is going to expose that you're this imposter and everyone's going to know it. So this this is a message that came in over our texting platform from one of our students several years ago, where they shared with us how they felt stupid compared to everyone else in the dorm, and this perception that everyone else is doing 3 different leadership organizations and making 4.0s, and I need to be on their level, but I'm not. And so this definitely has that feeling of a student experiencing imposter syndrome, that they you know, don't understand that probably everyone else in their dorm also feels like they're stupid compared to everyone else, and that, you know, they can be successful and they need to just not kind of be worried about that social comparison. But, you know, unfortunately, you know, this was a message we got from them later on in a term, that they bombed 4 out of 5 midterms. Who really needs to succeed? McDonald's is fun. So you can see how quickly this imposter syndrome can spiral into being, you know, someone who's very defeated and giving up on the idea of finishing in higher education. So that's one reason students don't want to seek help. Another we've brought up a couple of times is avoiding shame. So we had an incident several years ago where one of the students we were working with had stopped going to class because the tires on her car were bald and her car was no longer safe to drive. But she had not told anyone about this. You know, she did not want to share that her car was in this state and she didn't have the money to pay for it. But luckily she shared it with us because this particular program she was in had funds available for things like fixing your car, because it, you know, it was a school where everyone had to commute. So we were able to connect her with the right type of resources to get her the help she needed. But, you know, she spent time missing classes and falling behind because she just didn't want to admit to being in this type of financial situation. And then finally, you know, we mentioned this a little bit in the beginning, this culture of self-reliance. And this is a quote from a research study that's cited at the bottom, where this researcher at Michigan, Milwaukee, is looking at help seeking amongst African-American males in college, especially surrounding mental health. And this was a quote from one of the students in that study about, you know, when they're feeling down, feeling kind of sad, that they rarely talk to anybody. You know, they just try to do things internally, just breathing. But as far as talking to somebody or showing them exactly what's going on, I feel like I do not do that as often. And this is one of the big themes that has come out of Dr. Watkins' work, is around students from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds really being raised with this idea, like, you do it on your own, you don't talk about those things. And, you know, this can be a huge impediment to people actually wanting to seek help, even when they know it's available and know it could do some good for them. So how do we help students get over many of these different types of feelings? Well, you know, it's a very complicated question. So I'm able to offer one type of solution. It stems from this research by Dr. Nicole Stevens at Northwestern about difference education. So this was a program she and her colleagues put together where incoming students, as many incoming students do at every college, went to a panel of older students talking about what it was like for them when they were freshmen and had to come in to school and adjust to what was going on. But the panels these students went to, they varied based on one very important qualification. For some of the students, the panel they went to, the students on the panel talked about their challenges and how they got through them in terms of their kind of socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds. And Dr. Stevens has really been focused on how we help first generation students succeed. So what the first generation students on that panel did was they talked about how, the challenges they face and how being a first generation student helped them get through it. And so reframed the whole first generation experience as kind of the reason why they were successful. There were other students on the panel who were not first generation, students who came from more privileged backgrounds, more economically wealthy backgrounds, went to college prep schools. They talked about how their lived experience really helped them succeed in college as well. So everyone kind of talking about like, the place I came from in high school and younger is really what's led me to success today, whatever that background was. And then tried to look at how did this experience with students hearing that, your background is a strength and a place of resilience going to impact their behavior. And so the first thing they found that, when students learned that these class differences are a source of strength and resilience for everybody, it led first generation students to more frequently seek help from their professors and other campus resources. And being those who are, more likely to seek help now, it predicted an increase in their GPA. And just to show you what kind of impact that had, there was, no significant change in GPA for those continuing generation students whose parents attended college, but the significant increase by almost 3/10 for those first generation students. So this appeared to be just one avenue by which to help this group of students, these first generation students, overcome some of the stigma or shame or other types of psychological barriers to help seeking by framing their experiences as something that is going to lead to their success in college. So, if you have a student and you have successfully communicated with them that help is available, this help would be helpful, and now they want to go and seek help, now they have to actually go out and get it. And there's all sorts of issues that can arise with, actually going forward and getting the help that we're seeking. And one of the really good examples of this in research comes from research on getting people to get their flu shot. This is a topic that's studied often, not only because it's a big public health issue, but also because it's something easy to look at. It's trying to get people to do this one thing one time. And so in this particular study, these researchers worked with a company, one of those companies where the nurses come in and administer the flu shots right there in your office. So it's really convenient, and yet people still don't do it. What they did was they sent people in this company postcards to remind them about the upcoming flu shot clinics. And version of the card just kind of had the information on it about the dates and the times where you get your flu shot. But a second version gave people these blanks and asked them to fill in the day, the month, and the day that they would actually go get their flu shot. Now, this was not submitted anywhere. This was sent to their home. They may or may not have written it down. Nobody knows. And certainly, no one at the company saw it. There was no follow-up from this besides just giving people this opportunity to write it down. There was a third postcard that actually added time. So asked people to also write down the specific time on that day that you will go. And what they found was the more specific they allowed people to write down their plan for getting a flu shot, the more likely they were to actually do it. So just writing down the date you would get it, led to about a 2.5 percentage point increase, and then you had another approximately 2 percentage point increase if they also had a slot to write down the time. And again, the researchers didn't know if people wrote it down, if they used it at all, but at least getting that message and having that there to make them think about when exactly am I going to do this was able to kind of create a construct in their memory that allowed them to remember to actually go get their flu vaccine on that particular date. And so this is, I think, an easy one that we can incorporate, and this is something I've shown before with people who are relying on email as their primary communication with students, is that when we push them this information about campus resources and try to raise their awareness of what's out there, we see emails typically like this. This came from a different client I've worked with about, if you need help with the writing, with your writing, there's a writing center. Here's where it is. Here's when it's open. Here's the phone number. You just get that basic information in there and hope that students will make that leap to saying, oh, great, now I know about this, I will go use it. One potential edit to this, there's actually kind of a few behavioral concepts baked into this particular email, but on the point of helping students make plans, it's just ending with this question of when will you visit the writing center, or prompting them in the same way that the flu vaccine researchers did to make a specific plan. And it doesn't matter necessarily whether or not students actually write down the plan. They don't have to respond in any way to tell you the plan. The point is just sort of triggering that idea of you should make a plan, and that helps them adhere to it. So just to kind of recap, this abbreviated psychosocial model of help seeking that, when we need our students to seek help for the challenges they're facing, it's sort of a long psychological process, and it's very hidden, and it seems like something that, choosing to get help or not get help shouldn't be this complicated, but it really is. So making sure that students know that help is available, and really broadening our perspective on what that means to different students, that this is a source of help, convincing them that, they can be helped, that they shouldn't just give up, that these resources will be effective for them, helping them overcome the different types of psychological barriers that make them not want to get the help that they kind of know deep down inside would benefit them, but they're still too threatened to do that. And then finally, helping them build the tools to, make a plan to get that help and follow through on those plans. That way, it doesn't get slipped through the cracks in their very busy and otherwise stressful lives. So this is great. I see we're wrapped up about 10 minutes early, which is perfect. I want to thank everyone who has been listening to me for the last half an hour or so, and who participated in the polls. And I would be happy to answer questions or talk about cases or whatever else you want to do with the rest of this time.
Or there's also tips. It was really interesting to hear you, Ross, talk about using students that are struggling to actually be the ones that give help. And I think that that's something that perhaps we can put in practice at some of the colleges. I think some of our colleges, for example, do orientations specifically for our scholars or specifically for undocumented students. And just brainstorming in my head, sometimes we ask the students that are our stellar students to come in and help in those orientations and participate in panels. Why not, perhaps, and what would you think of the idea of bringing a student who is not seeking help or who's struggling to come in and actually help you do those presentations or talk about their journey with the incoming students?
Yeah, no, I think that sounds like an excellent idea if you can come up with the right circumstances to get the student motivated to do that sort of thing. So as I mentioned, there is this body of research that when you're giving help to someone else can be very motivating. So just one example, one of the studies in that research was about people who are trying and struggling to lose weight. And they were actually more motivated to lose weight when they were asked to give other people tips on losing weight. And this is something they're struggling with. So it's, they're not necessarily the world's best person at losing weight. but that was more motivated than when other people gave them advice, because, getting advice from other people, while it's necessary at some points, is sort of inherently kind of puts you in this passive, less kind of low self-efficacy position, and cannot always be motivating to kind of be the target, the person who needs advice. So kind of flipping that script and letting students who are struggling feel that power of being the one giving others advice might actually be more effective way, especially if they're very threatened by help seeking itself. Now they're sort of getting the help they need without actually having to ask for it.
And let me go to some questions here. We have an advisor that tells us about a case here that the student does not have a worker's permit, and she's extremely frustrated and she is seeking mental health, but she's angry that she's studying hard and won't get a job in the field that she wants. And the advisor and the student have worked together to create an LLC, but that's not enough. And the advisor is wondering, how can I help the student understand and embrace this new path?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I know, and that was something that came up during our discussion and planning this webinar, this new challenge with students getting this college education and having this fear that, well, when it's done, I'm not really going to be able to leverage it because of, employment laws in this country. Yeah, so I think, the first thing I go to is just kind of the literature on growth mindsets. And so at one level, just trying to help a student understand that things change. Like right now, this is the way, they don't have a worker's permit. This is the way laws are written. That won't necessarily always be the same. And I think, helping them see like a college education just keeps you flexible for the ways in which things could change. And I think these ideas about setting up LLCs or other ways of being sort of an independent contractor kind of reflect like having that type of flexibility. But then also, I think the growth mindset can also help. I would imagine a student like that has a certain perception of like where they wanted to go, who they wanted to be, and they're running into this barrier, this worker's permit issue. But, that's another element of, kind of the growth mindset is like, sort of understanding like your trajectory can change, and that's going to be okay. And, having this college education is going to make it easier for those types of trajectory changes. So that would be my first thoughts on that issue.
I think there's also a lot of research out there that's showing that in this generation and even the previous generation, people are changing careers often. So what you thought you might want to be now will change, or perhaps will change a few years later. And that college education can help you pivot from one thing to another. But certainly we at TheDream.Us are very aware that this is an issue that it's creating and will create stress with our scholars, especially with whatever happens with the case in the Supreme Court. So just know that we at TheDream.Us are also thinking about how we can support, how we can work with these scholars as these issues, the law issues come up and decisions come up. So for example, we will be putting together some other resources on other income opportunities that are available for the students, like the LLCs or independent contractors. We recently have heard about work co-ops that might be a help. So we at TheDream.Us are doing our own research and trying to figure out some resources for you. Okay, here's another question. Let's see. How can we support a student who hasn't followed through on a referral without coming across as though we're harassing them?
That's a good question. And I think that's a lot of, I think that the first step I think about is kind of what I was talking about with this whole model of help seeking, is you're saying like they're not following through on a referral, and trying to first understand like what is the main reason why they're not following through on that referral. Because I think that's where you stumble into this idea of like you're harassing them because you don't really know how to target your help for them, because if you don't know the reasons behind their behavior, you're just sort of punching in the dark at maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And this is where I see people in colleges, you just get into like the reminders, like just send constant reminders. But if a person's issue with not following through is, if is not forgetfulness, then a reminder means nothing. So if there's a way, from your experience with a student or from doing some sort of follow-up with the student to try to understand, like, is it forgetfulness? Is it busyness? Is it shame? Is it threat? That's really important first step. And then from there, I think you can try to, target that whatever specifically psychologically is going on to get them over that hump. So I think it's just sort of broadening out this perspective of like, why aren't they doing this? And I guess the other alternative being like, is there another way of help that is not this referral? Is there something other way to get them to have the help they need? Because maybe whatever you're referring them to is just too threatening or too inconvenient or whatever the barrier is. But yeah, you kind of need to try your best to figure out the why first.
And when you ask that student the why, do you recommend that you send more a general email saying, what's preventing you, what's happening, or do you actually list, like, what's preventing you is said A, B, C, and D, and actually list it out for the students, for the student even to look at these and start thinking about what's keeping them from doing it? How specific or general do you want that? Should that response be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, in a lot of the work we do, because we're operating over text messaging, we do a lot of kind of giving people choices to try to help narrow their thinking. That can be really helpful for some people because it's generally, people don't always know why they act the way they do. And so giving them some language to put to it or some ideas about like, maybe this is going on, is this going on, can definitely help start that conversation instead of just sort of an open-ended, why aren't you doing this? Because, it might be difficult for them to articulate exactly why, or they might rationalize a reason. I think we often see a lot of people who are threatened by something, they don't want to do it, and they're just like, well, I've been too busy. When in actuality, they really haven't been too busy. They could have gotten it done, but there's something deeper going on. So sort of giving that option to say like, I'm this anxious about this or something could be a very helpful way to start.
Okay, well, I see no more questions coming in right now. So, we're at time, and I really want to thank you, Ross, for sharing your knowledge and expertise. And thank you to all who are attending this webinar. As I said earlier, we will share with you the PowerPoint and the recording, and we will continue bringing you other resources and expertise to you, our partner colleges. So thank you for all, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.